The scream came from the forest edge, sharp and sudden, cutting through the cold night air, just as the first carriages rolled toward the mating ball. Lyra Ashwood froze on the stone path, her silver gown catching moonlight, her heart hammering against her ribs. Everyone else was moving toward the castle lights in the distance, laughing, hopeful, dressed in their finest. She was the only one who turned the other way. She had spent 3 weeks preparing for this night. Her mother had sewn the gown by candlelight, after long days at the healing house, stitching tiny beads along the hem, because Lyra had once admired a dress like that in a market stall. Every unmated wolf in the Thornwood pack was expected at the ball tonight. It was the one night when fate decided who belonged to whom, when the mate bond could awaken between strangers with nothing more than a single look. Lyra had told herself for weeks that she did not care whether she found a mate. But standing there in her mother's careful stitching, some small part of her had hoped. Then came the scream again, weaker this time, more like a moan of pain than a cry for help. Lyra turned from the path that led to the castle and ran toward the trees instead. She found the old woman half collapsed against the roots of a bent oak, her cloak torn, her hands scraped and bleeding. She looked impossibly frail, her white hair loose around a face lined with age, her breathing shallow and rough. For a moment Lyra simply stared, unsure if the woman was a lost traveler or something worse. A trap set by bandits who sometimes worked these roads on ball nights, when young wolves traveled the paths in their best clothes carrying coin for the celebrations. But the woman's eyes opened, and what Lyra saw in them was not danger. It was fear and exhaustion, and something like relief at not being alone anymore. "Please," the woman whispered. "My ankle. I cannot stand." Lyra knelt without thinking twice. Her mother was the pack healer, and Lyra had spent her whole life learning at her side, wrapping wounds, setting bones, easing fevers. It was instinct now, more natural to her than dancing steps she had practiced for the ball. She examined the ankle carefully, feeling the swelling beneath her fingers, noting the way the woman flinched but did not cry out. "It's not broken," Lyra said gently, "but you cannot walk on this tonight. Where are you traveling from?" The old woman's eyes searched Lyra's face for a long moment before she answered. "I was walking. I like to walk sometimes, among the trees, away from noise and crowds. I did not expect to fall." It was a strange answer, vague in a way that made Lyra curious, but she did not press. People had their reasons for wandering alone, and this was not the night to demand explanations from a stranger in pain. In the distance, she could hear the faint music beginning to drift from the castle. Violins and laughter carried on the wind. The ball was starting. If she left now, she might still make it in time to be seen, to stand among the unmated wolves before the doors closed for the night. She looked at the old woman's trembling hands, at the blood drying on her palms, at the way she seemed to brace herself, as if expecting to be left behind. Lyra tore a strip of fabric from the underside of her own gown, the part no one would see, and began binding the ankle with careful, practiced movements. "There is a cottage not far from here," Lyra said. "It belongs to a friend of my mother's. We can get you warm and safe there tonight, and I will fetch proper supplies to treat you. You do not have to trouble yourself," the woman said, though her voice carried a note of hope she could not quite hide. "You are dressed for something important. I can see it in your gown." "It's a ball," Lyra said simply. "It will happen again next year. You will not survive another hour out here in the cold." Something flickered across the old woman's face, something between surprise and quiet emotion, as if she had not expected such an easy answer. Lyra helped her rise, letting the woman lean her full weight against her shoulder, and together they made their slow way through the trees. The music from the castle grew fainter with every step, replaced by the sound of wind through branches and the woman's uneven breathing. Lyra did not look back toward the lights. She had made her choice, and something about the warmth of the woman's gratitude, silent but unmistakable, told her it was the right one. The cottage belonged to Marin, an elderly healer who had once trained Lyra's mother and now lived alone at the edge of the forest, tending herbs and treating travelers who wandered too far from the main roads. Marin opened her door without hesitation when she saw Lyra's familiar face, though her eyebrows rose at the sight of the ball gown and the stranger leaning heavily against her. "You missed your dancing for this," Marin said, not quite a question. "She needed help," Lyra answered, as if that settled everything. To her, it did. They settled the old woman by the fire, and Lyra worked quickly, cleaning the scrapes on her hands, wrapping the ankle properly, with clean linen, soaked in a mixture of herbs that would ease the swelling by morning. The woman watched her the entire time, with an expression Lyra could not quite read, somewhere between curiosity and something deeper, something almost protective. "What is your name, child?" The woman finally asked, once the worst of the pain had faded and warmth had returned to her cheeks. "Lyra Ashwood." "Lyra," the woman repeated softly, as though testing the shape of it. "And you gave up your ball for a stranger you found on the road." "You were not a stranger who needed nothing," Lyra said. "You were a person who needed help. That is different." The woman studied her for a long moment, the firelight flickering across her lined face. Not everyone would see it that way. "Then they are wrong," Lyra said simply, and went back to preparing a warm broth from Marin's kitchen, unaware of how closely the old woman continued to watch her, unaware of the quiet decision forming behind those tired, searching eyes. Outside, the night deepened, and the music from the distant castle grew louder as more carriages arrived. Lyra could imagine the scene without needing to see it. The great hall filled with candlelight, unmated wolves standing in careful rows, waiting for the moment when a single glance might change their entire future. She thought of her friends who were surely there now, hoping, watching every face that entered. She did not feel the ache of missing it the way she thought she might. Instead, there was a strange sense of peace settling over her as she sat by the fire, listening to the old woman's breathing grow steady and calm, watching Marin nod approvingly at her careful work. "You have your mother's hands," Marin said quietly, watching Lyra check the bandages one more time, before settling into a chair beside the bed. "Steady. Certain. She would be proud of you tonight, ball or no ball." Lyra smiled, though tiredness was beginning to creep into her limbs. "I only did what anyone should have done." "No," the old woman said from the bed, her voice stronger now than it had been in the forest. "Not anyone. You did what very few would have done, and you did it without hesitation, without knowing anything about me, without asking for anything in return." There was a weight to her words that Lyra did not fully understand, a depth that seemed to carry more meaning than the simple kindness of the evening deserved. But she was too tired to question it, and the old woman seemed content to let the silence settle between them, comfortable and warm in the firelight. Lyra did not know, as she banked the fire and prepared to spend the night watching over her patient, that miles away in the great hall of the castle, chaos was beginning to unfold. She did not know that the Alpha King himself had arrived at the ball with a purpose far greater than tradition demanded, searching the crowd with restless eyes for a face that would never appear among the unmated wolves that night. She did not know that her absence, small and quiet as it seemed to her, was about to shake the foundations of the entire kingdom. All she knew, as she drifted toward sleep in the chair beside the old woman's bed, was that she had helped someone who needed it, and that the choice had felt right, in a way that no ball, no dance, no faded glance across a crowded room ever could have. She closed her eyes to the crackle of the fire and the steady breathing of the stranger she had saved, unaware that fate had not abandoned her at all that night. It had simply chosen a different door to walk through. In the castle, the Alpha King stood at the center of the great hall, tall and commanding, his dark eyes moving from face to face among the gathered wolves. Cale Draven had ruled the kingdom for 3 years since his father's passing, carrying the weight of leadership with a steady hand and a heart he rarely let anyone see. Tonight, for the first time and longer than he cared to admit, he had allowed himself a flicker of hope. The elders had spoken of signs, of a pull he might feel the moment his true mate entered the hall, and though he trusted little in old stories, some part of him had wanted to believe. But face after face passed before him, and nothing stirred. No pull, no recognition. Only the growing unease of a king who had let himself hope for something and found nothing waiting for him. And beside him, though he did not yet know it, an empty space remained where his mother should have stood. Queen Mother Elara had not been seen at the castle since early evening, and no one, not even her most trusted attendants, could say exactly where she had gone. The night was far from over, and the storm it was about to bring would touch every corner of the kingdom before dawn. The first light of morning crept through Marin's small window, and Lyra woke stiff from the chair but alert the moment she heard the old woman stirring. She rose quickly, checking the bandaged ankle, relieved to see the swelling had gone down through the night, just as she had hoped. The old woman watched her with clear, rested eyes now, and something in her gaze had sharpened, as though the fog of pain from the previous night had lifted, to reveal someone far more perceptive than Lyra had first realized. "You did well," the woman said, testing her ankle carefully, as Lyra helped her sit up. "Better than well. I have known trained healers who could not have wrapped it so precisely." "My mother taught me," Lyra said, gathering the used cloths to wash them in the basin by the fire. "She has been the pack healer for 20 years. I have been at her side since I could walk." "A healer's daughter who gave up her mating ball for a stranger," the woman mused, watching Lyra move about the small cottage with quiet efficiency. "Tell me, do you regret it, now that the sun has risen and the ball is long finished?" Lyra paused, considering the question honestly, rather than offering the easy answer that might have pleased a guest. "I have thought about it a little," she admitted. "I wondered what it might have been like, standing in that hall, wondering if I would feel something when a stranger looked at me. But then I remember how frightened you looked in the forest, and I know I made the right choice. The ball will come around again next year. You would not have survived the night out there alone." The old woman's expression softened into something Lyra could not quite name. Warmth, mixed with a strange sort of sorrow. Not every young person would think that way. Most would have seen the ball as their one chance, their single night to secure a future, and they would have walked past an old woman on the road without a second glance. Then their future would be built on something broken, Lyra said simply, wringing out the cloths and hanging them to dry. "I could not have danced with an easy heart, knowing I left someone to suffer in the cold." Marin entered from the small kitchen, carrying a tray of warm bread and tea, setting it down with a knowing smile that passed between herself and the old woman. A silent understanding that Lyra was too tired and too focused on her patient to notice. "Eat something, both of you. The roads will be busy today with everyone returning from the ball, and no doubt full of gossip about who found their mate last night and who did not." The old woman accepted a cup of tea gratefully, wrapping her weathered hands around its warmth. "I imagine there will be quite a lot of gossip indeed," she said, and there was something almost amused in her tone that Lyra did not catch. As the morning stretched on, Lyra helped the old woman practice walking, with the aid of a cane Marin kept for such purposes, moving slowly around the small cottage, while testing her balance. Despite her age, and the previous night's ordeal, the woman moved with more grace and determination than most people half her years, and Lyra found herself admiring the quiet strength beneath the frailty she had first seen in the forest. "You carry yourself like someone accustomed to being watched," Lyra observed as they paused near the window, the woman leaning lightly on her arm. "Even in pain, even exhausted, you never once looked lost or helpless, only proud." The woman's eyes flickered, with something like surprise at being seen so clearly. "You are more observant than most young people I have met," she said carefully. "Perhaps it comes from your work. Healers learn to read more than wounds, I think. They learn to read the people carrying them. My mother always says the body tells the truth even when words do not," Lyra said, smiling at the memory of countless lessons learned at her mother's side. "She says pain has a language of its own, and if you listen closely enough, it tells you everything you need to know." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Lyra said proudly, "though she will likely have quite a lot to say to me when I return home, and explain why I missed the ball entirely." The old woman's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Perhaps she will surprise you. Mothers often understand more than their children expect, especially when it comes to matters of the heart, and matters of duty, existing side by side." By midday, word had begun trickling into the small village near Marin's cottage, carried by travelers passing along the forest road. Lyra caught fragments of conversation as she stepped outside to fetch water. Whispered rumors passed between neighbors with wide eyes and hushed excitement. The Alpha King himself had attended the mating ball the previous night, they said, searching the crowd with unusual intensity, and had left before the celebrations ended, his expression thunderous, his mood dark enough that even his closest guards had kept careful distance. More unsettling still were the rumors that the Queen Mother had gone missing sometime during the previous evening, that the castle guards had been quietly searching the surrounding lands since dawn without success, that whispers of alarm were spreading through the pack faster than anyone could control. Lyra listened to these fragments with growing unease, though she could not have said exactly why the news troubled her so deeply. She thought of the old woman resting inside Marin's cottage, of her mysterious vagueness about where she had come from, and why she had been walking alone in the forest at night. A small, uncertain suspicion began to form at the edges of her mind, though she pushed it away, as too strange, too unlikely to be true. When she returned inside with the water, the old woman was sitting by the window, watching the road with an expression Lyra had not seen before, something like worry mixed with resignation, as though she understood exactly what commotion her absence had caused, and felt genuine regret for the trouble it must be causing others. "Is something wrong?" Lyra asked, setting down the water, and studying the woman's face carefully. "I fear I may have caused quite a bit of worry by wandering off as I did," the woman admitted quietly. "I am not accustomed to explaining my comings and goings to anyone, and I did not think of how my absence might alarm those who care for me." "Do you have family searching for you?" Lyra asked gently. "We should send word. I did not think to ask before, only to help you, but if someone is worried—" "There is time yet," the woman said, though her eyes remained fixed on the road outside. "Let me rest a little longer, and regain my strength properly, before I face what awaits me beyond these walls." Lyra did not press further, respecting the woman's wish for privacy, even as her curiosity grew sharper with every passing hour. She busied herself instead with small tasks around the cottage, helping Marin prepare simple meals, checking the bandages periodically, listening to the old woman's stories of places she had traveled and people she had known, though the woman was always careful to keep certain details vague, certain names unspoken. As afternoon light slanted golden through the windows, the old woman reached out and took Lyra's hand in her own weathered fingers, her grip surprisingly firm. "I want you to know," she said, her voice carrying unexpected weight, "that what you did last night, choosing to help a stranger over attending something you had prepared for and hoped for, speaks to a character rarer than you understand. Whatever comes of this, whatever unfolds in the days ahead, please remember that your kindness was never wasted, no matter what any of it might have cost you." Lyra felt a strange chill at the seriousness in the woman's tone, though she smiled and squeezed the frail hand gently. "You speak as though something terrible is about to happen." The old woman's answering smile was gentle, but did not quite reach the worry still lingering in her eyes. "Not terrible, child, only unexpected. Life has a way of rewarding kindness in ways we never anticipate, sometimes in ways that turn our whole world upside down before setting it right again." Outside, the sound of hoofbeats began to grow louder along the forest road, more than one horse moving with urgency, and the old woman's expression shifted into something like quiet resolve as she turned toward the door, as though she had been expecting this moment all along. The hoofbeats grew closer, thundering down the forest road with an urgency that made Lyra's pulse quicken. She moved instinctively to stand near the old woman, some protective instinct rising in her chest even though she did not yet understand what danger might be approaching. Marin appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression calm but alert, the look of someone who had lived long enough to recognize trouble before it fully arrived. Through the window, Lyra saw them, a group of riders in the black and silver colors of the royal guard, their horses lathered with sweat, their faces tense with exhaustion and worry. At the front of the group rode a figure Lyra had never seen in person, but recognized instantly from descriptions whispered throughout the pack her entire life. Broad-shouldered and dark-haired, his expression carved from stone, his eyes scanning every structure along the road with barely restrained desperation. The Alpha King himself had come to Marin's cottage. Lyra's heart began to race as the riders halted outside, as the king dismounted with fluid, powerful movements, and strode toward the cottage door, without waiting for anyone to announce him. She had heard countless stories about Kael Draven throughout her life, tales of his strength in battle, his fairness in leadership, his reputation for being both respected and slightly feared by those who served beneath him. None of the stories had prepared her for the sheer presence of the man now filling the small doorway, his dark eyes sweeping the room, until they landed on the old woman seated by the window. The transformation in his expression was immediate and overwhelming. The hardness melted away, replaced by something raw and unguarded, relief so intense it seemed to weaken his knees for just a moment before he caught himself. "Mother," he said, his voice breaking on the single word, and crossed the room in 3 quick strides to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his own, with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible from someone so powerfully built. We searched everywhere. I feared the worst had happened. Lyra stood frozen near the fireplace, the pieces suddenly falling into place with a clarity that left her breathless. The vague answers about walking alone at night, the proud bearing despite her frailty, the knowing way she had spoken of things she should not have understood so deeply. The old woman she had rescued from the forest, the stranger she had tended through the night instead of attending her own mating ball, was Queen Mother Elara, mother to the Alpha King himself. "I am well, my son," Elara said softly, reaching up to touch his face with visible affection. "Better than well, thanks to the extraordinary care of a young woman who found me injured on the forest road and chose to help me rather than continue on to her evening plans." Cale's head turned then, his dark eyes finding Lyra across the small room for the first time, and she felt the full weight of his attention settle upon her like a physical force. His gaze moved over her, taking in the healer's satchel still slung across her shoulder, the tired lines beneath her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night spent tending someone else, the simple, modest dress she had changed into that morning, so different from whatever finery she must have worn the previous evening, if she had truly missed an event as important as the ball. "You are the one who helped my mother," he said, and it was not quite a question, though uncertainty flickered across his features, as though he were trying to reconcile something in his mind. "Yes," Lyra answered, finding her voice, despite the sudden dryness in her throat. "I found her in the forest last night, injured and unable to walk. I brought her here for care." "Last night," Cale repeated slowly, and Lyra watched something shift behind his eyes, a dawning realization that seemed to strike him with the force of a physical blow. "You were on the forest road last night. During the mating ball." "Yes," Lyra said again, uncertain why his tone had grown so strange, so carefully controlled. Elara, watching the exchange between them with quiet interest, spoke gently into the tension that had suddenly filled the small cottage. "This young woman gave up her place at the mating ball to save my life, Cale. She did not know who I was. She simply saw someone in need and chose to help, without hesitation, without asking anything in return." Cale rose slowly from his kneeling position beside his mother's chair, his eyes never leaving Lyra's face, and she saw something complicated moving through his expression, a mixture of gratitude and something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, like the shifting of a puzzle piece finally sliding into place after a long and frustrating search. "I was at the ball last night," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of the commanding tone he had used with his mother, replaced by something more uncertain, more searching. "I was looking for someone." The elders spoke of signs, of a pull that would guide me to my fated mate among the gathered wolves. "I searched every face in that hall, and I felt nothing. No pull, no recognition. I left angry, believing perhaps the old stories were simply wrong, or that whoever I was meant to find had not attended at all." Lyra did not fully understand the weight behind his words, the significance of what he was slowly working toward, but something in the way he studied her now, intense and searching, made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I did not attend," she said simply. "I told you already. I found your mother on the road instead." "Yes," Cale said softly, taking a step closer, close enough now that Lyra could see the flecks of amber threaded through the darkness of his eyes. "You did not attend. Which means the woman I was searching for in that crowded hall, the one meant to complete the bond the elders spoke of, was never there to be found at all. She was here instead, saving my mother's life in the middle of the forest." The realization settled over the small cottage like a held breath, and Lyra felt her heart begin to pound as understanding dawned slowly, impossibly, undeniably. Elara watched the exchange with a soft, knowing smile, as though some part of her had suspected this truth from the very first moment Lyra had knelt beside her in the forest and offered help without any thought of reward. "That cannot be certain," Lyra said, though her voice trembled slightly, betraying the uncertainty churning beneath her attempt at composure. "You cannot know that, simply because I was absent from the ball." "Perhaps not with absolute certainty," Cale admitted, though his eyes had not once left her face since the realization struck him. "But there is only one way to know for certain, and it does not require a crowded hall or old traditions. It only requires a single moment shared between two people to discover whether the pull the elders spoke of exists at all." Outside, his guards waited patiently, their horses shifting restlessly in the afternoon light, unaware of the quiet, momentous exchange unfolding within the small cottage walls. Maren busied herself discreetly in the kitchen, granting the moment its privacy, while Ilara watched her son and the young healer with an expression of quiet, hopeful anticipation, as though she alone understood the true magnitude of what was about to unfold between them. Lyra stood very still, aware of every eye in the room resting upon her, aware of the strange, charged silence that had settled over the small cottage. She had grown up hearing stories about the mate bond, about the sudden pull that was said to connect two souls the moment they truly looked at one another. But she had always considered such stories the kind of thing told to children before bed, comforting but not entirely real. Standing now, before the Alpha King himself, she found herself uncertain whether to hope for the stories to be true, or to fear what such a truth might mean for a healer's daughter, who had never once imagined a life inside castle walls. "I do not know what you expect to happen," she said carefully, taking a small step back despite herself. "I only helped someone who needed help. I did not do it hoping for anything in return, and I certainly did not do it expecting to be standing here, discussing fate with a king I have never met before today." Something in her honesty seemed to ease the tension in Cale's shoulders, and the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile, unguarded and genuine, in a way that seemed at odds with the stern reputation Lyra had always heard attached to his name. "That is precisely why I believe what my mother suspects may be true," he said. "You acted with no thought of reward. Most who seek my attention do so with calculation, with hope of favor or position. You gave up an entire evening of possibility for a stranger on the road, and you speak now as though the idea of being my mate is more burden than blessing." "Forgive me," Lyra said, feeling heat rise in her cheeks, "but I am a healer's daughter, not someone raised to imagine a life at court. This is a great deal to consider in the span of a single afternoon." Ilara reached out from her chair and touched Lyra's hand gently, drawing her attention away from her son's searching gaze. "No one is asking you to accept anything today, child. Fate does not demand immediate answers. It only asks that we remain open to what it reveals in its own time. What matters right now is that you saved my life, and my son and I both owe you a debt of gratitude that has nothing to do with bonds or fate at all." The gentle reassurance eased something tight in Lyra's chest, and she found herself grateful for the Queen Mother's steady presence, a calming anchor amid the sudden upheaval of the afternoon. Cale, too, seemed to take his mother's words as a cue to soften his approach, stepping back slightly to give Lyra room to breathe, though his gaze remained thoughtful, curious, unwilling to fully release the possibility that had taken hold of him since the moment he understood the truth of where his mother had spent the night. "Will you at least allow me to properly thank you?" he asked, his tone shifting into something more measured, more respectful of the space she clearly needed. "My mother's life is not a small thing to me. Whatever else may or may not exist between us, you deserve recognition for what you have done, and my mother deserves proper care as she continues to heal." Lyra considered his words carefully, aware that refusing entirely might seem ungrateful, though accepting felt like stepping onto a path whose destination she could not yet see. "I would ask only that your mother continue her recovery here, under Maren's care, until her strength has fully returned," she said finally. "The road to the castle would be difficult for her ankle so soon after injury, and I would rather see her healed properly than rushed back to comfort before she is ready." Cale studied her for a long moment, something like respect deepening in his expression. "A healer through and through," he said quietly. "Very well. I will leave a portion of my guard here to ensure her safety, and I will return to the castle to manage the concerns of my council, who I suspect are quite anxious by now, wondering what has become of their king since dawn." As he moved to leave, he paused at the cottage door, turning back to look at Lyra one final time, his expression carrying a weight of unspoken questions he seemed to have decided not to voice, at least not yet. "I will return to check on my mother's progress," he said. "And perhaps, in doing so, we might have the chance to speak further, without the urgency of this afternoon pressing upon us." Lyra nodded, uncertain how to respond to the quiet invitation buried within his words, and watched as he departed with his guards, the sound of hoofbeats fading slowly into the distance, until only birdsong and the crackle of the fire remained within the small cottage. Ilara let out a soft breath once her son had gone, settling back into her chair, with an expression that held equal parts relief and quiet amusement. You handled that with remarkable grace, she said. Most young women, faced with the possibility of becoming queen, would have fainted dead away or begun planning their wardrobe before he had even finished speaking. Lyra managed a small, tired laugh, some of the tension finally draining from her shoulders now that the room had returned to its earlier calm. I do not think I am the kind of person who dreams of crowns, she admitted. I only ever wanted to help people, the way my mother taught me. Whatever this bond might mean, I cannot pretend to understand it, or to know what my life might look like if it proves true. No one understands it fully, not even those who have lived it, Ilara said gently. But I will tell you this, from a mother who has watched her son carry the weight of leadership alone for far too long. He needs someone who sees him clearly, who values kindness over position, who would have helped an old woman on a forest road even knowing it meant sacrificing everything she had hoped for that night. If fate has chosen you, Lyra Ashwood, then fate has chosen wisely. Lyra said nothing in response, though the words settled deep within her, stirring something she was not yet ready to name. Outside, the afternoon sun continued its slow descent toward evening, and somewhere beyond the forest, word of the Queen Mother's rescue was beginning to spread through the pack, carried on whispers that would soon reach every corner of the kingdom, setting into motion events that neither Lyra nor Kale could yet fully anticipate. News, once released into the world, has a way of growing beyond the truth that first shaped it, and by the time the sun set fully behind the trees, the story of the healer's daughter who had missed her mating ball to save the Queen Mother's life had already begun transforming into something far larger than the quiet, simple act of kindness it had actually been. 3 days passed before Kale returned to the small cottage at the forest's edge, and in that time, Lyra had convinced herself the strange afternoon with the king had been little more than a passing moment, unlikely to repeat itself once the demands of ruling a kingdom pulled his attention elsewhere. She busied herself with her usual duties, helping her mother at the healing house in the village, tending to the everyday wounds and illnesses that made up the fabric of pack life, and tried not to think too often about dark searching eyes or the strange warmth that had filled her chest when he had looked at her. Her mother, upon learning the full truth of what had happened, had been equal parts proud and stunned, into uncharacteristic silence, sitting quietly by the fire that first evening, as Lyra recounted the events of the missed ball, the injured stranger, and the astonishing revelation that had followed. When she finally spoke, her mother's voice had carried a gentleness Lyra rarely heard. I always taught you that kindness matters more than convenience, her mother said, taking Lyra's hands in her own weathered ones. I did not imagine it would lead you quite so far, but I am not surprised it was you who chose the harder, better path. Whatever comes of this, know that I am proud of the choice you made, regardless of any bond or crown that might follow. It was this memory Lyra carried with her on the morning Kale's carriage arrived unannounced outside her family's modest home, drawing curious stares from neighbors who had already begun whispering about the healer's daughter and her strange connection to the royal family. Lyra stepped outside to find Kale himself waiting beside the carriage, dressed more simply than she might have expected for a king, his expression carrying none of the stern authority she had witnessed during their first meeting. I hope I am not intruding, he said, and there was an unfamiliar hesitance in his voice that softened something in Lyra's chest, despite her earlier resolve to remain cautious. My mother continues to recover well under Marin's care, and she insisted I bring you news of her progress in person, rather than sending a messenger. Lyra suspected the Queen Mother's insistence had less to do with practical updates and more to do with quietly encouraging her son toward the very connection she had already begun championing, but she said nothing of her suspicion, simply nodding and gesturing for him to walk with her toward the small garden behind her family's home, away from the curious eyes of neighbors who had already gathered more gossip than they needed. How is she truly? Lyra asked, once they had found a measure of privacy among the herb beds her mother tended. Improving each day, Kale said, some of the earlier tension easing from his shoulders as they walked. She speaks of you often, and quite highly, I might add. I believe she has already decided you belong at the castle, regardless of what fate ultimately reveals between us. Lyra felt heat rise in her cheeks, and busied her hands with pinching dead leaves from a nearby herb plant, more to occupy herself than out of any real need. Your mother is kind, but I worry she sees more in a simple act of help than truly exists. Is that truly what you believe? Kale asked, stopping to study her with the same searching intensity she remembered from their first meeting. Or is it easier to believe that than to consider what it might mean if she is right? The directness of his question caught her off guard, and she found herself unable to summon an easy deflection, the honesty in his voice demanding something equally honest in return. "I do not know what I believe," she admitted quietly. "I have spent my whole life imagining a future built around healing, around helping my mother, and eventually taking over her work in the pack. I never imagined anything like this, and I confess, it frightens me more than I wish to admit." "It frightens me as well," Kale said, and the admission seemed to surprise even himself, as though he had not intended to voice such vulnerability so openly. "I have ruled this kingdom for 3 years, without allowing myself to want anything purely for my own sake. Duty has always come first. But something about that night in the cottage, watching you tend my mother with such quiet competence and genuine care, stirred something in me I have not felt in a very long time." They stood together in the quiet garden, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, neither quite certain how to bridge the distance between fear and possibility that stretched between them. It was Lyra who finally broke the silence, her voice steady despite the uncertainty still churning within her. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "instead of trying to decide what fate intends for us in a single afternoon, we might simply allow ourselves to become acquainted properly. Not as king and healer, not as fated mates bound by old stories, but simply as two people who happen to meet under unusual circumstances." A genuine smile broke across Kale's face then, transforming his features into something younger, less burdened by the weight of leadership he carried so constantly. "I would like that very much," he said, "more than you likely realize." And so began an unlikely friendship, built slowly over the following weeks, through quiet visits and shared conversations, neither rushing toward the bond that lingered unspoken between them, both content to let understanding grow at its own careful pace. Lyra learned that beneath his commanding exterior, Kale carried a dry sense of humor and a genuine curiosity about the healing arts she practiced daily. Kale, in turn, discovered that Lyra's quiet strength extended far beyond her skill with wounds and herbs, revealing itself in the steady, unshakable kindness that guided everything she did. Neither of them yet knew that not everyone within the castle walls welcomed this quiet, growing connection with open arms, and that beneath the surface of pleasant visits and easy conversation, resentment was already beginning to take root among those who had hoped for a very different outcome to that fateful mating ball. Weeks passed, and the quiet friendship between Lyra and Kale deepened in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. He began visiting more frequently, sometimes bringing his mother along as her strength returned fully, other times arriving alone under the guise of checking on Alara's continued recovery, though both of them understood the true purpose behind his visits had shifted into something far more personal. Lyra found herself looking forward to the sound of his carriage approaching, found herself saving small stories from her day to share with him, found herself, despite every attempt at caution, falling into something she could no longer pretend was simple friendship. It was during one such visit, on an afternoon when autumn had begun painting the forest in shades of gold and amber, that everything between them shifted irrevocably. Kale arrived with a wound along his forearm, sustained during a border skirmish with a rival pack that had tested the eastern boundaries of their territory. Though his guards had wanted to summon the castle physician immediately, Kale had insisted on riding first to the healing house, where Lyra worked alongside her mother, trusting her steady hands more than any other healer in the kingdom. "It is not serious," he assured her, as she guided him to a quiet examination room, though the tightness around his eyes suggested more pain than he wished to admit. "I simply did not want anyone else tending it." Lyra said nothing to this admission, though her heart quickened as she carefully cut away the torn sleeve of his shirt to examine the wound beneath. It was a clean cut, not deep enough to require serious concern, but painful nonetheless, and she worked with practiced efficiency to clean and treat it, her fingers steady despite the awareness humming beneath her skin at his closeness. It happened as she finished securing the bandage, glancing up to check that he was comfortable, meeting his eyes fully for the first time since she had begun treating him. The world seemed to still around them. A warmth spread through Lyra's chest, undeniable and overwhelming, a sense of recognition so profound it stole the breath from her lungs. She saw the same shock reflected in Kale's expression, his dark eyes widening slightly, as the same sensation clearly washed over him, an invisible thread suddenly drawn taut between them, connecting something deep and essential that had been waiting, patient and quiet, since the moment they first met in his mother's cottage. "You feel it too," Cale said softly, his voice rough with emotion he made no attempt to hide. "Yes," Lyra whispered, unable to look away from him even if she had wanted to. "I feel it." The mate bond, the very thing the elders had spoken of, the pull that was supposed to have guided Cale through a crowded hall of unmated wolves, had finally revealed itself, not in the grandeur of a mating ball, but in the quiet intimacy of a healing room, over a simple wound, tended with careful hands and an open heart. "I searched an entire hall of wolves for this feeling," Cale said, reaching out slowly to take her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. She did not. "I felt nothing among any of them. And then I found it here, with a healer, who chose kindness over ambition, who gave up everything that night to help my mother, without knowing what it might cost her." "I did not do it for this," Lyra said, though her fingers curled gently around his, accepting the warmth of his touch. "I want you to know that. I helped your mother because she needed help, not because I hoped for anything in return." "I know," Cale said, and the certainty in his voice carried the weight of complete conviction. "That is precisely why this feels so right. Fate did not simply hand you to me through tradition and ceremony. It revealed you through your character, through everything that makes you who you are." They remained there for a long moment, hands joined, the newly discovered bond settling around them like a warmth neither had known they were missing until it finally arrived. Outside the healing house, the ordinary sounds of village life continued uninterrupted, unaware that within those simple walls, the future of the kingdom had just quietly, irrevocably, changed course. But even as joy filled the small room, a shadow of concern crossed Lyra's thoughts, unbidden and unwelcome. She had heard enough whispers during Cale's visits over the past weeks to understand that not everyone within the castle welcomed the idea of a simple healer's daughter rising to stand beside their king. Among those who had attended the mating ball hoping to secure his attention, resentment had already begun taking root, and Lyra suspected that the confirmation of their bond would only deepen the hostility she had thus far managed to avoid. Cale seemed to sense her sudden shift in mood, his thumb tracing gentle circles along the back of her hand. "Whatever concerns trouble you, know that I will stand beside you through all of it," he said quietly. "This bond is not something either of us chose lightly, and I do not intend to let anyone diminish what we have found, simply because it did not arrive through the paths they expected." Lyra managed a small, grateful smile, though the unease lingered at the edges of her thoughts, a quiet premonition of challenges yet to come. She did not yet know how quickly those challenges would arrive, or how sharply they would test the strength of the bond that had only just begun to bloom between them. Word of the confirmed bond between the Alpha King and the healer's daughter spread through the kingdom faster than any wildfire could have traveled, and while most of the pack received the news with genuine warmth and curiosity, a small circle within the castle walls received it with something far darker. Chief among them was Wren Holloway, daughter of a prominent noble family who had attended the mating ball with every expectation of catching the king's attention, and who had spent the weeks since nursing a bitter disappointment that had only sharpened into something more dangerous, as rumors of Lyra's growing closeness to Cale reached her ears. Wren had grown up believing her family's status made her the natural choice for any king's mate, and the idea that fate had instead chosen a simple healer's daughter, someone with no noble blood, no political connections, nothing but ordinary kindness to recommend her, struck Wren as an insult too great to accept quietly. "She tricked her way into the Queen Mother's favor," Wren said, one evening, to a small gathering of allies within the castle, her voice carrying the practiced sweetness that had always concealed her sharper intentions. "Think of it, a convenient injury on the very night of the ball, and suddenly the king's own mother owes her life to this stranger. It is far too convenient to be mere chance." Her words found willing ears among those who resented the sudden shift in the social order, and soon, whispers began circulating through the castle and beyond. Twisted versions of the truth, suggesting that Lyra had somehow orchestrated the entire encounter, that she had known Ilara's identity from the start, and used the opportunity to manipulate her way into royal favor. Lyra first became aware of the rumors during a visit to the market square, where she noticed conversations falling suddenly silent as she passed, felt the weight of suspicious glances following her through stalls she had visited countless times without a second thought. It was Marin who finally told her the full extent of what was being said, her weathered face creased with concern, as she relayed the poisonous gossip that had begun spreading like rot through the kingdom. "They say you planned it," Marin said gently, watching Lyra's expression carefully for her reaction. "That you knew who Alara was before you ever found her on that road. That you staged the entire rescue to secure the king's attention." Lyra felt sick at the accusation, the unfairness of it striking deep despite her attempts to remain composed. "That is absurd," she said, though her voice trembled with the effort of controlling her emotions. "I did not even know her name until Kale arrived at your cottage. How could anyone believe such a thing?" "People believe what serves their own interests, child," Marin said sadly. "There are those within the castle who cannot accept that fate chose kindness over bloodline, and they will say whatever they must to reclaim the position they believe should have been theirs." When Kale learned of the rumors circulating through the castle, his anger burned cold and controlled, a stark contrast to the warmth Lyra had grown accustomed to seeing in his presence. He called a meeting of his council immediately, addressing the whispers directly and forcefully, making clear that any further attempts to spread false accusations against Lyra would be met with serious consequences. "I will not allow lies to poison what fate has revealed," he declared before the assembled nobles, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "Lyra Ashwood saved my mother's life, without any knowledge of who she was, without any expectation of reward. Anyone who continues to suggest otherwise insults not only her character, but my mother's testimony and my own judgment." Though his forceful defense silenced much of the open gossip, it did little to ease the quiet resentment simmering beneath the surface, particularly within Ren's circle, who simply grew more careful in how they voiced their displeasure, waiting patiently for a better opportunity to undermine the growing bond they so bitterly opposed. That opportunity arrived sooner than expected, when a valuable heirloom belonging to the royal family went missing from the castle treasury, and Ren, seizing the moment with calculated precision, suggested quietly to several trusted allies that Lyra's recent frequent visits to the castle made her a convenient and plausible suspect. The accusation, though entirely baseless, spread quickly enough to reach Lyra's ears within a single day, and she found herself summoned before the castle guard for questioning, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and disbelief that anyone could truly believe her capable of such a betrayal after everything she had done. Kale arrived at the questioning the moment word reached him, his fury barely contained, as he demanded to know who had authorized such an accusation, without a shred of evidence to support it. It was Alara, however, who provided the calm, decisive action needed to resolve the matter swiftly and completely. "I was present during every one of Lyra's visits to the castle," the Queen Mother stated firmly, before the assembled guards and council members. "She has never once entered the treasury, nor shown any interest in matters beyond her healing work and her care for our family. I suggest, rather than wasting further time on baseless accusations, that the guard investigate who among the castle staff might have both the access and the motive to see this young woman falsely implicated." The pointed nature of Alara's suggestion was not lost on anyone present, and within days, careful investigation revealed the heirloom had never truly gone missing at all, simply misplaced during recent renovations to the treasury chamber, found tucked safely within a storage crate that had been overlooked. The false accusation crumbled entirely, leaving Ren's involvement in spreading suspicion clearly exposed to those paying close attention, though she remained careful enough to avoid any direct evidence connecting her to the scheme. Lyra emerged from the ordeal shaken but resolute, more determined than ever to prove through her continued actions and unwavering character that the bond she shared with Kale was built on something far stronger than gossip and jealousy could ever hope to destroy. Kale, for his part, drew her closer through the difficult weeks that followed, his admiration for her quiet strength and grace under pressure only deepening with every challenge she faced, without losing herself to bitterness or fear. "You handled that with more patience than I could have managed," he told her one evening, as they walked together through the castle gardens, the autumn air cool and crisp around them. "I wanted nothing more than to see everyone responsible punished severely, yet you remained calm, even as your name was dragged through false accusation." "Anger would have only given them more reason to believe the worst of me," Lyra said thoughtfully. "I would rather let my actions speak clearly than waste energy proving myself to those determined to see me poorly, regardless of what I do." Kale studied her for a long moment, something like wonder shining in his dark eyes. "My mother was right about you from the very beginning," he said softly. You possess a wisdom that goes far beyond your years, and a strength that no crown or noble title could ever grant." Though the false accusation had been resolved, Lyra understood that Ren and her allies would not simply abandon their opposition so easily, and she braced herself quietly for whatever challenges still lay ahead, determined to face them with the same steady resolve that had carried her through every difficulty since that fateful night on the forest road. In the weeks following the false accusation, Ren Holloway did not abandon her scheming, though she grew far more cautious in how she pursued it, understanding now that direct attacks against Lyra's character would only draw suspicion back toward herself. Instead, she shifted her strategy, working quietly to convince members of the council that a healer's daughter, however kind, lacked the education and refinement necessary to one day serve as queen, hoping to sow enough doubt among the kingdom's most influential voices that Kale might eventually be persuaded to reconsider the bond entirely. Lyra remained largely unaware of these subtler efforts, focused instead on her continued work at the healing house and the steadily deepening relationship she shared with Kale, who made increasing efforts to include her in aspects of castle life, introducing her gradually to the responsibilities and traditions she would one day be expected to navigate as his mate. Alara took a particular interest in this preparation, spending long afternoons with Lyra, discussing matters of governance, diplomacy, and the delicate balance required to lead a kingdom with both strength and compassion. "You already possess the most important qualities a queen requires," Alara told her during one such afternoon, as they sat together in the castle's private garden. "Compassion cannot be taught to someone who lacks it naturally, and you have shown more genuine care for this kingdom's people in the short time I have known you than many who were born into positions of privilege ever managed to develop." It was during a formal council gathering, called to discuss preparations for the kingdom's upcoming harvest festival, that Ren finally made her boldest move, standing before the assembled nobles to voice concerns she had carefully rehearsed for weeks. "With respect to His Majesty," she began, her tone carrying practiced deference that did little to mask the calculation beneath it, "I must ask whether the council has fully considered what it means to place someone without formal education in diplomacy, without experience in matters of state, in a position of such consequence. Kindness alone, however admirable, does not prepare someone to navigate the complex demands of ruling alongside a king." A tense silence fell over the council chamber, many present exchanging uncertain glances, uncertain whether to voice agreement or wait to see how Kale would respond to such a direct challenge. Lyra, seated near Alara at the edge of the gathering, felt her heart clench with anxiety, though she forced herself to remain composed, refusing to give Ren the satisfaction of visible distress. It was Kale who rose to answer, his expression calm but resolute, carrying none of the anger he had displayed during the earlier false accusation, replaced instead by a quiet, unshakable conviction that silenced the chamber more effectively than any outburst could have. "You raise a fair question, Lady Holloway, and I will answer it honestly," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "It is true that Lyra Ashwood was not raised within these castle walls, was not educated in the formal traditions of court diplomacy from childhood. But consider this. On the night of the mating ball, when every unmated wolf in this kingdom gathered with hope of securing their future, she alone chose to abandon that opportunity to help a stranger in need, without any knowledge of who that stranger truly was." He paused, letting his words settle over the assembled council before continuing. "Since that night, she has faced false accusations, cruel gossip, and unfair scrutiny, with more grace and patience than many seasoned diplomats within this very chamber could manage. She has spent countless hours learning the responsibilities that will one day be hers, not out of obligation, but out of genuine dedication to serving this kingdom well. I would ask this council, honestly, what formal education could possibly teach the qualities she has already demonstrated through action, rather than words?" The chamber remained silent for a long moment, and Lyra saw several council members nodding slowly, visibly moved by Kale's impassioned defense. Even those who had privately sympathized with Ren's concerns found themselves unable to argue against the evidence of character Kale had laid so plainly before them. Alara rose then, adding her own voice to the moment with quiet authority. "I owe my life to this young woman," she said simply. "I have watched her closely these past months, and I can attest, without hesitation, that she possesses every quality this kingdom needs in a future queen." Wisdom is not always found in books and formal training. Sometimes it is found in the quiet, consistent choice to do what is right, regardless of personal cost. Ren, recognizing the tide had turned decisively against her, offered a stiff, insincere concession before retreating to her seat, her earlier confidence visibly shaken. Though she would continue to harbor resentment privately, the public defeat of her challenge effectively ended any further attempts to undermine Lyra's position before the council, and word of Kale's passionate defense spread quickly through the kingdom, further cementing the growing affection the pack held for the healer's daughter, who had captured their king's heart through simple, unwavering kindness. In the months that followed, preparations began in earnest for a formal ceremony to celebrate the bond between Kale and Lyra, one that would honor both royal tradition and the unconventional path that had brought them together. Lyra continued her work at the healing house throughout the preparations, refusing to abandon the calling that had defined her long before fate had introduced her to a king, and Kale, understanding the importance of this work to her identity, ensured that her role as healer would remain honored and respected, even as she prepared to take on new responsibilities within the castle. On the day of the ceremony, held beneath the same autumn sky that had witnessed so much of their unlikely journey together, the entire kingdom gathered to witness the joining of their king to the woman who had once given up everything for a stranger on a forest road. Lyra stood before the assembled crowd, dressed simply but elegantly, her mother beaming with pride among the gathered guests, Marin watching with quiet satisfaction at how far the frightened, injured stranger she had once sheltered had helped guide this remarkable young woman toward her destiny. As Kale took her hands before the entire kingdom, his eyes carrying the same warmth and certainty she had first glimpsed in the healing room months before, he spoke words that would be remembered and repeated throughout the pack for generations to come. This kingdom searched for its future queen within the walls of a grand hall, believing tradition alone would reveal her, he said, his voice steady and full of genuine emotion. But fate had already chosen her, long before that night, through countless small moments of kindness that asked for nothing in return. Lyra Ashwood did not seek a crown. She sought only to help those in need, and in doing so, she became the very heart this kingdom has always needed. The crowd erupted in genuine celebration, and Lyra felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks as she looked out over the faces of people she had healed, people she had grown up among, people who now welcomed her not as an outsider elevated by chance, but as someone who had earned her place through the simple, powerful act of choosing compassion when it would have been easier to choose herself. In the years that followed, Lyra became known throughout the kingdom, not merely as queen, but as a healer who continued to tend the sick and injured alongside her royal duties, refusing to let her new position separate her from the calling that had defined her heart long before any crown had touched her head. She and Kale ruled together, with a balance of strength and compassion that brought lasting peace and prosperity to their people, and the story of the healer who skipped her mating ball to save a poor old woman became a tale told throughout the land, a reminder that true nobility is never found in bloodlines or ceremonies, but in the quiet, unwavering choice to do what is right, regardless of what it might cost. And so it was that Lyra Ashwood, once simply a healer's daughter with no expectation of anything beyond a life of quiet service, became the most beloved queen the kingdom had ever known, not because fate had chosen her through tradition, but because she had chosen kindness, again and again, until kindness itself had shaped her entire destiny.